the diplomatic melodrama of the recall by the French government of the American and Australian ambassadors in response to the breach of the so-called Contract of the Century, the order for French submarines by Australia, should not obscure the tug-of-war that is being played out at this very moment, far from the media noise and the thunderous announcements made from the gilded heights of international diplomatic offices. The reality of geostrategic alliances could take you straight to the China Sea, just in time to witness the signing of a vast security partnership involving the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom to protect the Indo-Pacific area. This agreement, signed at the very moment when Australia denounced the contract with France, was accompanied by the astonishing images of this British warship crossing the Taiwan Strait, which, as you may recall, separates China from the island of Taiwan. But what were the British going to do so far from their coasts, and especially so close to China? On its Twitter account, the frigate HMS Richmond announced that it had just gone through a busy period working with its partners and allies in the East China Sea, and that it was heading to Vietnam. Sometimes you can't believe your ears. U.S. military allies in the China Sea? The crossing of the Taiwan Strait by a British-flagged warship? This unprecedented situation, which has triggered the anger of the highest Chinese authorities, surely deserves to be investigated. Why would the British, the historical allies of the Americans, come and get lost in the Formosa Strait if they did not see an economic and geostrategic interest in it? How do the Chinese, the second economic power in the world, manage conflicts when they intervene in what they consider to be their private domain? But also, how can you, as an investor, take advantage of this geopolitical information to adapt your investment strategy? Come on, let's go. While the Taiwanese defense minister did not comment on the Chinese reaction to the presence of a warship near their coast, he said he was unaware of the missions of British ships in the Taiwan Strait. But the minister added that his government was closely monitoring all movement near Taiwan. And it is true that China has been deploying intense military activity around the island of Taiwan lately, following the latest Chinese statements claiming Taiwan as Chinese territory. China is sending supersonic aircraft into Taiwanese airspace almost daily, while at the same time invading disputed areas in the South China Sea with warships and so-called fishing boats. Taiwan regularly finds itself at the center of serious tensions between China and the United States, frictions visible through significant military movements, but also through thinly veiled threats, where the word war seems increasingly pronounced. If the stock markets are not yet worried about the situation, it is much more problematic than it seems. Last January, the U.S. aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt entered the South China Sea with the stated objective of preserving and protecting a free and open Indo-Pacific region to promote freedom of navigation. The escalation of tensions reached a peak when 25 Chinese military aircraft flew close to the Taiwanese coast last May. This unprecedented show of force took place the day after Anthony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, took aim at Beijing, which the U.S. considered to have an aggressive attitude towards Taiwan. Joe Biden then sent an unofficial delegation to signify the U.S. president's commitment to the island. The visit triggered an immediate reaction from the Chinese, who firmly opposed any official contracts between the United States and Taiwan. Tensions between Taiwan, Beijing, and the United States have arguably not been this high in nearly 70 years. Joe Biden did meet with Xi Jinping just recently, but it was the first time since his presidency, if we put aside the courtesy call following his nomination. Joe Biden wished that, and I quote, "the competition between their two countries would not veer into conflict," to which Xi Jinping would have answered that, and I quote again, "both countries and the world will suffer in the case of a Sino-American confrontation." The list of disagreements between Washington and Beijing remains long. One could list trade competition, Beijing's claims on the South China Sea, and the Taiwan issue. The island of Taiwan is a de facto independent state that has been called the Republic of China since 1949 to differentiate it from the PRC, or People's Republic of China, However, the island is, legally speaking, a province of China, over which the People's Republic of China currently exercises no power. The island, the size of Belgium, is separated from the mainland and therefore from China by the Taiwan Strait. It is surrounded to the north by the East China Sea, to the east by the Pacific Ocean, and to the south by the South China Sea. To give you an idea of the strategic importance of the South China Sea, without getting into the subject of fishing that has been raging for years between China and its neighbors, suffice it to say that more than half of the world's commercial maritime traffic passes through its many straits each year. Regional ports such as Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan are among the most important in the world in terms of volume. And to add insult to injury, the China Sea is said to contain significant hydrocarbon resources of the order of 11 billion barrels of oil and more than 5 trillion cubic meters of gas. Taiwan is not a sovereign state from a UN perspective. The name Republic of China, or ROC, that Taiwan officially calls itself, is recognized by only 16 nations, a list that is getting shorter every year by the constant efforts of PRC diplomacy. But it is one of the few countries that have controlled the pandemic, which should accelerate the impressive economic growth that the country has experienced in recent years. You can see that Taiwan's GDP per capita and purchasing power parity, in black, is catching up with the US in green and is well above China's. Taiwan is the world's fourth largest producer of high-tech electronics. The difficulties of TSMC, the Taiwanese semiconductor giant, is one of the sources of the current semi-paralysis of our globalized economies. Similarly, one of the 3 largest industrial companies in the world, Foxconn, another leading technology company, which produces Apple's iPhones, iPads, and iPods, and employs nearly 1.5 million workers and engineers, the vast majority of them in China, is a Taiwanese company. According to the Fraser Institute, which has established an index to measure the degree of human freedom by country, Taiwan is now one of the most free countries in the world. But what are the relations between Taiwan and China? The tensions between the two territories are not new. The victory of Mao Zedong's communists in 1949 turned the island of Taiwan into a refuge for the supporters of Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalist opponent of the communists. But it was the arrival in the region of the 7th Fleet of the US Navy following the outbreak of the Korean War that saved the fragile status of Taiwan from an invasion by the communists. The island of Taiwan thus became one of the elements of the American military system in the region, along with the bases in Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. China would like to apply the one country, two systems formula to Taiwan, as it has done for the time being with Hong Kong and Macau. Perhaps the current situation in Hong Kong, where China has just imposed a kind of electoral dictatorship through the latest elections on September 19th, will dissuade the Taiwanese from adopting the same formula as Hong Kong. But what is the relationship between the United States and Taiwan? Even leaving aside the question of the resources offered by the region comprising the China Sea and the subject of the technological lead possessed by Taiwanese companies, it is easy to understand why Taipei represents a major interest for U.S. foreign policy. The symbol of democratic and technological success that Taiwan represents is a perfect positive counterexample to the regime in Beijing. Coupled with its geostrategic position, this makes Taiwan a crucial U.S. partner in the Asia-Pacific. It should be noted that while the U.S. has played an important role in ensuring Taiwan's security over the past 40 years, it has never committed to intervene militarily on Taiwan's behalf if it were invaded by China. The United States is deliberately unclear in its policy to prevent a unilateral declaration of independence by Taiwan, as well as a unilateral annexation of Taiwan by China. It is reasonable to assume that Beijing will only have to continue to threaten Taiwan militarily and isolate it through diplomatic actions, of which it has a secret. Beijing is reducing year after year the short list of countries that recognize Taiwan's independence. And the threat to use force to bring Taiwan back into the Chinese fold is never far away. From Xi Jinping's perspective, the Communist Party's legitimacy rests on its promise to unify China. The growing rejection of the Taiwanese population to the project of unity with China, the increasingly hostile relations between Washington and Beijing on a growing number of subjects such as Hong Kong, the coronavirus, or the subjects of property and security, linked to advanced technologies worries Beijing. The grip on its 1.4 billion inhabitants could be challenged if Taiwan becomes an independent country. That said, with Chinese military spending 25 times greater than Taiwan's, Beijing has a definite advantage. The possible U.S. intervention is a question mark in assessing an invasion scenario. U.S. naval power has long deterred China from attacking, even though the United States abrogated its mutual defense treaty with Taiwan in 1979 as a condition for establishing diplomatic ties with Beijing. However, not intervening if Taiwan were invaded would damage the prestige of the United States, already damaged by the debacle of the Afghanistan withdrawal, as I explained in this video. And this is probably what explains the alliance recently signed between the United States, Great Britain, and Australia. The US refuses to let its hegemony slip away without resistance. One wonders what impact this situation of tension and the risk of armed conflict may have on the markets. A conflict, even indirect, between the two first world powers would obviously have important consequences on the market. A possible takeover of Taiwan's microprocessor production and the technological lead of its leading companies, especially in the telecommunications sector such as 5G, is likely to weigh heavily on the raging economic war. At the margin, harming the French arms industry may have a benefit, however small and far in the future, to the competing U.S. industry. The U.S. would not shed any tears if the French stopped producing submarines, frigates, tanks, or warplanes. To conclude this video, the importance of the tensions between Beijing and Taiwan should not be underestimated, because they could lead to an armed conflict between China and the United States, which would have dramatic human, geopolitical, and economic consequences. In future videos, we will have the opportunity to discover other points of friction between the Chinese expansion and the rest of the world. See you soon for new videos. Ciao.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like my videos, please subscribe and don't forget to hit the bell if you want to be notified of the next episode. And if you want to invest in the stock market over the long term or diversify your financial portfolio, I'm offering you an analysis of the 8 European star stocks to have. Thanks again for watching and have a great day.